Have you ever experienced with your plants that when you buy them and when you unbox them after repotting them, after spending a few weeks with them, they already look ugly and you no longer care for them because they're not as beautiful as when you first bought them? So that is a problem that I have faced before, and that is the problem that we will be tackling today, the problem of succulent desiccation. I will be giving you some ideas on what is succulent desiccation, why it happens, and how we can avoid desiccation on our succulents. Now, I just wanted to highlight this problem here in the channel because I don't think that a lot of people have any idea on what succulent desiccation is, and I don't think that is actually an accurate term, but that is the term that we will be using today. Me personally, when I started gardening, I didn't know what desiccation is and how it affects my succulents, and I was just blind to it, and it just keeps on happening and happening on my succulents, and I will just like neglect them and they will get mealybugs and then they will die. So that is the problem with a lot of beginner growers. So now I've been experiencing less and less desiccations with my newly bought succulents, so they're desiccating less. I will be giving you some example of succulents that didn't go through desiccation and then examples of succulents that went through desiccation, so you will compare how they look, and I will also give you the ideas of how I care for these succulents that have desiccated. Okay, now let's just go on to our first topic, and that is what is succulent desiccation. So I have some examples here of succulents that I have that went through desiccation. This is Echeveria elegans. Okay, you can see here, this used to be a larger succulent and it shrunk, it lost a lot of leaves, so that is desiccation. Succulents losing their leaves and shrinking, getting smaller, and not looking so good. So here is another example. Okay, this succulent recently went through desiccation. Okay, when I first bought it, I potted it here and it just dropped a lot of leaves, and you can see here it's looking very ugly. I cut off the flower stalks, the bloom stalks on this one because it had a lot and there were a lot of mealybugs on there. So that's what happened with this one. I also have this Echeveria Swan Lake, okay, if I'm not mistaken. So this plant used to be very large when I got it, and now it just shrunk and the leaves that are growing are much more smaller. So basically, desiccation is when a plant loses a lot of their leaves and they're no longer looking beautiful. And you can see here on this one as well, this is my purple beans. Okay, so you can see this is the purple beans that I have, and this is the only pups that it's growing now, but this used to be a much more larger succulent. So some succulents will be much more prone to desiccation, to dropping their leaves than others. I would say that with the jelly beans, Sedum rubrotinctum, a lot of people will be buying them. They will be looking lush, but once they reach their place and once they stay dry for a little while, they will just drop leaves. So a lot of people are actually discouraged from growing sedums because it's very easy for sedums to desiccate. So that's what happens with my jelly bean. Actually, a lot of my Sedum rubrotinctum really goes through desiccation, which is why you will see them with long stems. Like here, you can see here on this one, they will have long stems and they will have leaves on the tops, and the stems they have won't have any leaves at the bottom because it just dropped because of dryness. But desiccation doesn't only happen on leaves, sometimes it will also happen on stems. So drying up on stems, I will also call that desiccation. I have some example here. So here are two stems that I took off from the sedum that I have outside. It is Sedum dendroidium, or the tree sedum. Okay, you can see here it's very dry and the stems have just snapped off from their mother stem. Okay, so there was a stem at the end of this, and that was the one that was a stem that was planted, and that stem dried up, and now I have this. So we have that. Now some people will confuse drying up on succulents with rotting, because we think that if a succulent stem is getting ugly, shrinking, we will think of it as rot because probably we overwatered it. That's what we think. But sometimes drying up on stems happens because of underwatering. So they've been neglected and they had a lot of heat, they had a lot of stress, so the stems really shrunk. The succulent was trying to keep itself alive by absorbing moisture from the stems instead of the leaves. Or sometimes they will already have dropped their leaves and now they have nothing else to take energy from, so they will take energy from the stem, and that will dry up and that will desiccate, and you will have these ugly looking pieces. But sometimes a succulent will not be able to be saved. It will shrink right at the core of its stem and through the tips of the plants. So the whole entire plant will have shrunk by then. That is desiccation. That means you neglected your plant. So I think we're not going into the why it happens. So it happens because you neglect your plant, you don't water it enough, you give it too much heat, and also I think another reason. So I've fallen into this trap several times before, and I think it was the normal for me back then when I was starting. And I think some of my videos I showed before that's what I was doing with succulents, and I'm teaching that's how you do with succulents, that's how you pot them up. But now I'm realizing that it was wrong. So that is putting your succulents, planting your succulents in a lot of pumice. And I would not recommend that anymore. So you can see here I have some pumice here, but I added a lot more organic materials. And those plants that I have planted in a lot of pumice, they're usually the ones that give me problems later on. So if you have seen our recent repotting video here on the channel, you will know that a lot of my succulents that I have repotted doesn't have a lot of roots because they have a lot of pumice in their potting mix. So without a lot of roots, they will become stressed to the heat and they will desiccate. So that's because a lot of growers and a lot of beginners usually think that succulents, being the desert plants that they are, they can survive the heat and the stresses and the blazing hot sun even if they're planted in a very rocky potting mix. So some people think that because they're succulents, that's what they do. But in reality, not all succulents do that, and a lot of succulents, really, if you find them in the wild, they will be growing with other plants as well in soil and not in rocks. So a lot of succulents you'll find like this one and probably this one. Okay, I have seen some wild hunt for succulents like this, and they really grow on soil, on the earth, and not on rocks. Some other succulents will be growing on rocks, but they will usually have organic materials in between those boulders where they are growing. So a lot of succulents will actually appreciate a little more organic material into their potting mix. And I would show to you now the succulents that I have that are not planted in a lot of pumice, and you will find that they don't have desiccation as much as the others. Okay, so you can see on this one, this is Echeveria tipi, okay, if I'm not mistaken, and you can see all the leaves that it had retained from when I first got it. So I think the leaves it had was these ones at the bottom, and now it just continuously grew, and a lot of the bottom leaves haven't dried up. So you can see that the plant has retained a lot of its leaves. So if you compare it with this one, okay, so a lot of the leaves on this one has dried up. So that's what happens if you plant your succulent in a lot of pumice. This was planted in a lot of pumice back then, by the way. So if you plant them in a lot of pumice, they will just sacrifice a lot of their leaves to produce roots, to try to reach for moisture. But because it has a lot of pumice in their potting mix, they don't have anything to attach to. So once they push out roots and they don't have anything to attach to, once they get sun, those roots will just dry up, and they will just drop leaves because they use up their leaves to produce roots. So now, if a succulent is planted in a lot more organic material, the roots will have something to attach to. Even if it gets sun, the roots will not dry up because they have organic materials in their potting mix. So that's why they will not desiccate if you add a lot more organic materials in their potting mix. Okay, so for this one as well, this is very new anyway, by the way, and I'm actually surprised by how good this plant has stayed in my care. So this plant didn't have that central rosette when it first came here, but now it just continuously grew, and the leaves it has at the bottom hasn't dried up. So you can see here, okay, and I've been placing it here in my greenhouse with a lot of my other established succulents as well, and it didn't get bothered by the blazing hot sun that we have here because I added a lot more organic materials in the potting mix of this one. Also, you can see here that really beautiful, it just continuously grew. So I would really recommend that you add more organic materials. I also have another one, but this one was bought from a shop, so you can say that I'm cheating because this was not unrooted. This has some roots when I got it. Okay, I think this is Echeveria Rensiana. Okay, kind of resembling the Lola that we have, but this is a very new succulent. You can see here these sides leaves that just got wider. Those are the leaves that it had when it first came, and that wasn't that wide before. I think it was much smaller, but now it's getting wider. So you can see here that it hasn't dried up a lot of its leaves, and it stayed its size for a much longer time. So that's what happens if you add more organic material to their potting mix. So I think we just went seamlessly to our third topic, which is how you can avoid drying up on your succulents, how you can avoid desiccation. You add more organic materials to their potting mix. Also, I would say that watering plays a big role as well when it comes to succulent desiccation. So I would recommend that you water your succulents when they are dry, and some of those succulents like this one, the Mondo that we have, that is not looking really nice right now. Okay, I think somebody bought this and I'm just waiting for it to dry up before I can ship it. Okay, so this one, because it was a thick leaf succulent, I was neglecting it more, and now it just desiccated and it just shrunk in size. So it was actually much larger than this, and it was planted in a bigger pot, but because it has a lot of pumice, so it wasn't doing very well. And also what I noticed with these succulents, if you plant them in a lot of pumice, they will become stressed, so the leaves will become much more harder, and it will be harder for you to identify if they are thirsty. So sometimes they will be very hard, and then they will just drop leaves. They will just shrink their leaves and they will just drop them, and you don't know why they're dropping leaves. That might have had a lot of pumice in it, so you might want to adjust it, and you might want to add more organic materials to it. So that's what happened with this one. So that will also happen with your thick leaf succulents. Now, if you already have planted them, sometimes these thick leaf varieties, it will be harder for you to identify if they're thirsty because of their thick leaves. So if they're dry, and you leave them for about 2 to 3 or 3 to 5 days that they are dry, even if their leaves are not that wilted, not that soft anymore, you just water it if the potting mix is really dry, because watering it will help them root even if they're not that thirsty anymore. I would also say that with the Sedum George that we have here, now I'm looking at it, okay, and also with the Pachyveria glauca that we also have here, these are very thick leaf succulents. Okay, so what I would do is I would usually check my other succulents by the bottom leaves, if they're wilting, and then if they are, then I will water it. But sometimes with this plant, it doesn't wilt very much because it's a thick leaf succulent, and you will see here on this one that from a thick state, it will just dry up like this. Okay, so that's what happens with thick leaf succulents. So if they are really dry, even if the leaves are not that wilted, I will just water it. Same with the Pachyveria glauca that we have here. This also went through desiccation. This used to be a very large succulent. Okay, so even if the leaves are not wilted, but the potting mix is really dry, I will just water it right away. This is recently repotted last night. Okay, so that's just what I would say. I was repotting late at night last night because I had shipment of potting mix, so I was able to repot. And you can see here that the potting mix that I use has a lot more organic material, so they don't look like they're planted in pure pumice. And what I found with my other succulents that are really planted in a lot of pumice, they're just not doing well. And also, what helps desiccation even further in succulents, what makes their state worse, is when you neglect them and when they desiccate. Even if you water them, they're not growing leaves, so they're desiccating, so that's already a problem. And if you neglect them even further, they will attract mealybugs. So mealybugs, once they attack your succulents, they make their leaves ugly, and then you will not really care for your succulents anymore because they don't look good anymore, and you're no longer sure how to care for them because they already have an infestation, and you will just throw your succulent away, which is really a waste. So I would not recommend that you neglect your succulents. If they're not performing that well, or if they're not performing as good as your other succulents, try to replant them if they're really not doing anything for a long time. So try to replant them with a lot more organic material, see if it will help them. So I think that's about it for today's topic about desiccation. I really hope that you had some ideas on what to do with your next purchases this year so that you can establish them much more quicker. So if you just remember, if your succulent is dropping a lot more leaves than it is growing them, then you have a problem with your potting mix. So just keep that in mind, and probably it will help you guide you on your next purchases so that you can keep your succulents beautiful and you can grow larger succulents. If you have any questions when it comes to this topic, because I don't think that the video we have really discusses this topic thoroughly, so if you have any questions with that or any other succulent problems that you have, please comment it down below at the comment section. I will look at it and probably will make a video on that soon. I have other comments as well, other requests before, so please just stay tuned because I'm just preparing to make those videos. Please make sure to hit the subscribe so you don't miss any of our care tips in the future. And I think that's about it for this video, guys. I will see you on the next one. Bye bye.